In a previous lesson, I gave a general introduction to Octane. In this particular lesson, we're going to dive into the material types you can find in Octane and how to use them. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is to quickly set up a simple scene. And I'm just going to go to this cube right here and I'm going to drop in a sphere in my scene. I'm going to type the segments to 60. And the next thing will be to drop a plane to serve as the background. So I'm just going to go to my cube object here, and I want to click on my plane, right? So I just want to turn this positive in the z-axis, and there we go. So I'm going to move it back. Alright, so I'm going to increase the width and the height. I'm just going to set this to about 1000. Right, so it covers the entire scene. I'm going to drop this radius of this sphere to about 70. This is fine. Alright, so I'm going to zoom in a lot. I'm going to just pull this sphere to the side. I'm just going to make about 3 copies of this sphere. Alright, so now we have our scene set up. The next thing will be to start our Octane render. Alright, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying different material types to these spheres right here, and we can see the effect and the differences in those materials. I'm going to click on the Octane and I'm going to select the live viewer. Remember, in our previous lesson I showed you how to create a custom interface that favors Octane, right? So I'm just going to go and look that up. I'm going to click here and I'm going to select the new Octane interface that we created. Now I've included a link that contains labels of all these things. So basically it's a link that takes you to Autoi's website, and on that page you can see this whole interface properly labeled, right? So you can always refer to that to know the names of these things, or maybe you forgot something and you just want to quickly remember that, you can just quickly check the cheat sheet right there. Alright, so now that I've clicked on this, I have this rendered currently, and I'm going to just dive into my settings. Now I'm going to give you the settings I use on virtually every project, right? So it really doesn't change. It's usually the same. The only thing that changes are the max samples and the specular depth. Now currently the kernels we're using to render is called the direct lighting. Now the direct lighting is really fast, right? But at the same time does not give you that amazing result the path tracing gives you. Now you can always go into this direct lighting and tweak all of these settings, and yes, you're going to get amazing result. But what I like to use is the path tracing, right? So I feel the path tracing gives much more nicer result than the diffuse than the direct lighting. And I might be wrong, maybe it's because I'm just used to using path tracing, right? So for this particular setup I'm just going to set the max samples to about 600. Now if I have more complicated scene and I have more objects in my scene, or I have more geometry, I might want to raise this max samples, right? So I get very clean renders. One thing I can also do is to add a denoiser, which we're still going to do in our Octane classes. Alright, so the next one is a diffuse depth. I usually set this to 6. It usually never changes from 6, right? So most times it's set to 6, and if I want to get something even faster I might drop this down to 3, but most times it's usually set to 6. Now the specular depth, I usually set this to 6, but when I'm rendering anything that has to do with glass and I need it to be really clean, I can raise this specular depth to about 12. Now one thing I've also noticed is if you're trying to create glass and you want light to properly pass through that glass, you want to increase the specular depth a lot. So I'm going to show you samples and you're going to understand why you want to increase the specular depth. Now for this ray epsilon, I've never touched this. My filter size set to 1.2, I've never touched this. My alpha shadows is always turned on, and my GI clamp, I usually set this to just 1. So this is basically all the settings I do. I don't even come down here. I've never really touched any of these settings right here, right? Because I've really not found a use for them. Alright, so the next thing I want to just do is to make this whole process a one click. Alright, so I can just click on the button and it loads up this preset. Now for me to do that, I simply go to the preset here and I'm going to add a new preset. currently I have a preset called start, right? So I can just click on add new preset and I can name this to Octane quick preset, and I can click on add, right? So now I've added a preset right there. If I close this and let's say I go back to my PMC and then I just quickly select my preset, and I can easily load up that Octane quick preset, and it loads up all the settings we've done, right? So that means anytime you're arranging something, you just open your Octane, go to your preset and load this, and it's ready to go. So I'm just going to close that right now. Now I'm going to dive into Octane Materials, and the way you create a material in Octane is go to the materials section right here, and you want to click on the diffuse material. Now we have different type of materials, and we're going to be touching on quite a lot of them. So we're going to touch on the Octane diffuse, we're going to talk about the Octane glossy material, we're going to talk about the Octane specular material, and as well as the Octane metallic material. So we're going to touch this four. Now the first thing, I'm just going to click on the Octane diffuse material. Now you want to use these materials when you're creating any matte surface, right? So surfaces that are not going to be shiny, you know, they're just matte, so there's very little specular, there's very little specularity going on. So I'm just going to click on this and I'm just going to drag it directly on this sphere right here, and when I click that, it gets applied to this. So now when you double click to open up this material, we are seeing that white material right there, right? And the material type is set to diffuse. Now for the first option here, which is the diffuse, you can change the color from here, so you can easily set up different colors, and yeah, there you go. So you can see there is no specular channel right here, so that means you can get that nice specular reflection. Now one of the uses of the diffuse material are for creating objects that can emit light, right? So you do that in the emission channel right here. Every other material really does not have an emission channel, so that means they cannot emit light, right? So these are one of the uses of the diffuse material. Now if I turn off my diffuse, currently you can see the color is gone, and if I come to my emission, I can click on my black body emission, and now it's generating light. You can see that it's really lighting up this right here. Now one thing I want to do is to quickly go back to my Octane settings, and under my settings there is a default environment here that is applied. We don't want that, right? So we want to turn this to black, and when we might want to render to CD update, we render this. Now we can see what's happening. So we have this really lighting up our scene right there. Now before I continue, I want to quickly show you one more hack in Octane. So if let's say I go to my settings currently and I go back to my kernels and I drop this down to 200. Now if I render, the render won't be as clean as what we had initially. Okay, so let me drop this way down to about 50 and let me render again. So now we have this render. This is not as clean as what we had initially because I've dropped down the max samples. But what I can do is to go to my Octane object right here, and then I can select my Octane camera. Now basically what Cinema 4 is doing is just creating a basic camera and is applying an Octane camera tag right there. So if I go to my camera imager right here, I can turn on my camera imager and open up this drop down and enable the spectral AI denoiser. So now with my denoiser enabled, I can set the minimum denoiser samples to about 60. Alright, so now I'm just going to render this again, and I'm going to make sure that this is checked on right here. Now with this checked on, you can see we now have two tabs. Now we have the main render which we've done, and we also have the denoised render. So now when we click on this, you can see it's looking a lot cleaner. But you don't want to overdrop your samples, so you maybe want to drop this to about 300. You want to increase this to about 300 and render again. So now we're going to have a main render right here, and then you're going to have the denoised version right here. So you can see the denoised version is definitely looking really cleaner. So this can really come in useful when you're trying to get things out real quick. Now in terms of animation, the denoiser can sometimes give you undesirable results if you lower your max samples. So you want to make sure that you are increasing the max samples a lot, so you're just using the denoiser to just compensate the rendering, right? So you don't want to drop your samples too low, because when you do that you get some artifact as you render, you get some glitch and all of that. So you want to make sure that this is always set to a very good, a very decent value. Alright, so I'm going to just quickly delete the camera for now, and I'm going to close this. Now we have our object, a diffuse object emitting materials. Now the next material I want to focus on is the glossy material. So I'm just going to close this. I'm going to go to my materials, and I'm going to go to my Octane glossy material. Now I'm going to drag my glossy material and apply it to the second one. Now you can see immediately we have that nice glossy reflection going on there. So I'm going to open this up so you can see what's really happening. Now in this glossy material, now you see the material type is set to glossy. We have the diffuse, which is general and common to all material. Right here we can change the color. You can maybe make this yellow or orangey, and we have a specular channel right now. So if I disable this specular channel, basically it's like I'm going back to using a diffuse material. I mean, except for the fact that I don't have an emission channel right here. But if I turn this back on, you can see we have that nice specular reflections going on right there. Now this hotspot right here, if I begin to turn down my specular level, you can see it's no longer there, right? So we want to make sure that that is put up. So you want to make sure that you turn that way up here, and for some reasons you might want to also lower that. Now the roughness basically is going to blur out these reflections in your specular. Right, so if you have some materials that has blurred reflections and you're trying to recreate that in Octane, what you need to do is to go to the roughness channel right here, and then you can increase the roughness channel. I can drop this to 0.2, and now you can see we have that really nice roughened specular reflections right there. Now I'm going to go to the index right here. Now the index of reflection, basically we have different type of materials, and different materials have different index, right? So I think water is about 1.5, and metal has its own value. Also gold has its own value as well. All right, so I can increase this to about 1.6, and it's going to give me something even shinier than what I had before, right? So those are some of the things you can do with the index. And now we have the bump and the normal map and the displacement map. So basically these are just different channels that you can load up to this to give you some really nice results, right? So as we go into the course, I'm going to be using more of these maps, but I'm also going to use them currently in this lesson. But as I use them more, you tend to understand the way it works. Now for the normal map, I'm just going to load up a normal map texture, right? So I'm using polygon textures, and I'm just going to load up a concrete texture. So this is what a normal map is going to look like. So it has all those height information that can be loaded into your texture channel, right? So I'm just going to go to my normal map. I'm going to click on this right here, and I'm going to just quickly load up my normal map right there. Concrete, and I'm gonna load up on so now Cinematography is asking me if I want to copy this image I just loaded to the project location. So I'm just gonna click no, I don't really need that. Now if you look, so let me just zoom in a bit on this, and now you can see what's happening. We now have that normal map creating that height information for us. You can also do something similar with a bump map, but the normal map performs better than a bump map. Now we also have the displacement map. What the displacement does is to use textures loaded into it to displace the geometry, right? So you can just load up a displacement map and you can use that to drive this geometry right here. So what I want to do is to I'm going to disable this normal right here, and I'm going to just quickly load up a displacement map. All right, so the displacement map uses images, right, to displace the object right here. Now it's basically a white and black image that is loaded in, and then Octane Render is able to interpret the white as the area that should be raised and the black as the area that should remain the same. Now I'm just going to load up an image which is going to explain this a whole lot better. I'm going to go to my displacement, add a displacement map, and I'm going to click on this right here. Now the next thing will be to load a displacement texture. So I'm just going to click on this, and I'm going to go to my GIS placement files. Now there is a software called GS placement. Now GS placement is free, you can download it, and basically it just helps you to create this really nice displacement map right here. Now I'm just going to quickly load up GS placement, and this is how it looks like. I can just click on this and maybe select the first option that says classic, and I just click this to generate, and basically generate some black and white boxes depending on the profile you're clicking. So while I was explaining the displacement map, this is exactly what I mean. So we have some areas that are white, which is going to be completely pushed up. We have some areas that are not completely black, so those areas will be like in between. And so we have the black, which is really not going to do anything, right? So I'm not going to save this, I'm just going to close this, and I have one already, so I can just pick any one of this and I can just open this right up. I'm going to click no, and immediately you are seeing that displacement map right here, right? So I can just raise it to about 8K and I get something really nice and sharp. So I can increase the height of this, I can make it to about 40, and now you're really seeing that raised effect right here that is being created by the displacement map. Now the next, I'm just going to turn this off, I'm going to turn this on, so now we're back to a normal map. Now the next material type I want to work with will be the glossy material. I'm going to open up my materials, I'm going to check the Octane specular material, and I'm going to drag this and drop here. So you want to use this kind of materials if you're working with glass. Now before I continue, I want to just quickly create some light in my scene, and the way I do that is to go to my object, light. I'm going to create an Octane area light. So I'm just going to quickly move this out and rotate this, and I'm going to turn this up. So currently our light is visible inside our scene. I just want to go to the visibility, turn this off and turn this off. I want to go to the light settings, I want to reduce the brightness. Currently what we have is way too bright, so I'm going to set it to 15. Alright, so 15 works. You might also want to set up some additional light here as well, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so I'm just going to zoom back in here. Alright, so let me go back to my settings, and I want to really show you the power of this specular depth. Now if I turn this back down to 1, see what happens. Alright, so we are unable to see through that glass properly. That glass is not being rendered properly, which is why you want to increase your specular depth. Now if I take this all the way to 12, you can see it's way bright. If I drop this to about 6, you can see there's a difference right here. Now I'm going to quickly take this back to 12. I'm going to hit render. Now what I want to do is to select this compare here, and then I want to click on store render buffer. Now currently that's going to store the last frame you rendered here, and if you change any value here and re-render, see what happens. So that particular frame is saved, and you can just drag this line here to see the difference. So currently there's really no difference between 6 and 12, so it's really not wise to take it up to 12. Let me drop it to about 4 and see if there's a difference. Alright, so you see there's a significant difference, so you want to maybe drop this to about 6, and when you're done you could just click this and turn this off right here. I'm currently going to set my max samples back to 600 and hit render. So now we have a very nice clean render. So we still have a little bit of noise going on here, so I'm just going to fix that by going to my object, going to my Octane camera, click on this. So I want to go to my camera imager, I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to click enable, and I want to increase this to about 60. So when I hit render now, alright, so that's going to render out a version where the image is denoised. So I can just click on this to see that, right? So we now have a denoised image. Now for something this small, you might not want to use the denoiser, right? So you might want to turn this off and just increase the samples to about 800 to get a very clean render. Alright guys, that's it. I'll see you in the next lesson.